Hello, everyone. This week, Alex and I are joined by Doug Ricket, the CEO and founder of PayJoy. PayJoy is a fascinating company. It is using technology in a very interesting way to provide credit to people in emerging markets who would otherwise have very little access to financial services. So, Doug, I have a lot of questions about how that works. But first, I want to know a little bit more about your background. What steps in your life got you to where you are right now working in this industry? What is your story?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Boaz. Great to be here. I appreciate you having me on. For me, I grew up in tech, in Silicon Valley in the 80s, kind of in love with everything technology. I followed that through to study computer engineering and then started shifting direction a little bit where I joined the U.S. Peace Corps, which sends Americans to work in developing countries. And they sent me for 2 years to West Africa. And that really sparked a lifelong interest for me in international development as well. And so looking for how to put technology in service of that other half of the world has been, what's been driving me in my career and what brought me to start PayJoy.
So at the very start of your career, you were at the Peace Corps, and then you moved back to the tech world. And there was a bit of a dissonance between life in Silicon Valley and your experiences in the Peace Corps, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I remember, so I was a volunteer teacher for 2 years in West Africa, and I remember like at the university, sometimes the power would go out and, people may do the best they could, but sometimes it's just like, hey, the power is probably not going to come on today. There's no fuel for the generator, and people just kind of give up if they needed something electrical, like a computer. And I remember thinking there like, but at the same time, people really learn how to get ahead with so few resources. And so, for example, I remember then after Peace Corps, I was at Google as a software engineer and manager, and just super resource rich. I remember I could be at my desk until 2 a.m. and not even notice because fast computers, the air conditioning is always there. There's a supply cabinet full of pens and notebooks and everything you could possibly want. And it's interesting. I remember a couple of students who I worked with in Africa and the Gambia who went on and did, PhD at Oxford and kind of really, their careers could really take off when they got access to those resources. So I could just see that big difference. But in a way, people who come from that resource starved environment, I don't know, it's like training for a marathon at high altitude or something. Yeah. They get really conditioned and they're really able to take off if they can just get lucky and find their way to more resources.
Yeah, I mean, this is a super interesting experience because so I grew up in Costa Rica and in Hungary. Neither of them are in the very center of, the wealthiest nations, but they're both fairly developed. And then soon after university, I went and I worked in Southeast Asia in Burma, where, many of the things, we're supposed to build an internet company for Rocket Internet. And many of the things you mentioned happened, right? No electricity today. You got to figure out to start the generator or you won't be working today and the entire office won't be working today, or there's no internet today. So you have to go to the Four Seasons that for some reason always has internet and you have to work from there. And one of the things that is very interesting to me is I think most people in Silicon Valley have no idea what that's actually like. When they think of products and building for underserved markets for the most noble of reasons, they actually don't really get it. Do you have that impression too?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a different world. I think it's hard to know, it's like another planet almost. If you haven't been there, if you haven't lived it for some time, it is hard to imagine and really kind of feel what that's like.
Do you have any particular anecdotes or memories from your time working in the Peace Corps that you think were super transcendental?
A number of exciting, memorable times. But I think getting it kind of, what had the biggest impact on me, interestingly, so I was a teacher for 2 years, taught high school for a year, college for a year. But the first 3 months we were there in Peace Corps, they had us in training. Mm-hmm. And in my group, the education group, we were sent to these really small rural villages just to learn the local language and culture. And we'd visit some schools, on a field trip once a week, or the education department. But for me, that time in the training village where it was super rural was most impactful. And I lived with a host family. It was a small village, maybe 400 people, no electricity, no running water. My host family spoke no English. And so really really crazy different experience. I remember the Peace Corps truck dropping us off the first day, the Land Rover, and we like unloaded our suitcases and got sent off to our families. And then my host mother was showing me around the village, and there are a few wells in the village, like water wells. And I believe Saudi Arabia had paid for this as a, charity throughout the Muslim world of building these cement pumps in some cases. In other cases, it was like the old style, like bucket goes down 100 feet in the well. But my host mother took me one of these, hand pumps and had me step up on top of it and showed me how to like crank the pump. And I remember standing up there, and it's, evening, maybe 5 p.m. And there's the Muslim call to prayer echoing in the distance somewhere from a mosque. There's like the sound of donkeys and chickens and everything. And I'm like, whoa, I was looking for something different. And, I wanted to see the world like this is different. And then from there, that host family that I stayed with, the Cisse family, crossing the language barrier was a really cool, meaningful experience for me. So I got to learn Wolof, the language there that they spoke. And I had a 10-year-old host brother who became my walking dictionary, basically. I wanted to say, what's that in Wolof? Lila, la, la. And he'd say, Kajla, lolahin la. And I wrote myself a dictionary on paper.
Wow.
And it was really cool. Like, I didn't think I could learn a language that well as an adult. Like, I spoke, bad Spanish from Spanish class in school, but it was always
you had no choice.
Yeah, but here, no choice. It was 24/7 immersion. And it was really cool because with the language, there were all these mixing languages. There are probably like 4 or 5 common African languages that you could find, within 5 minutes walking around in a town. And probably even in that village, there'd be, families that spoke, 3 or 4 languages, in addition to English and French being mixed in there. And so people were just really open and welcoming to, like, if you were trying to learn their language and you knew some words and you could, put them together, they were like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like, I want water is fine compared to like, I would like a cup of water. Like they'll just, if they get your message, it's fantastic. And so learning to cross that language barrier was really powerful. And then just in a few months, it was amazing. Like be able to have some basic conversations. And I think it let me have, both the serious and the joking conversations with my host mother in the family was the one I became closest to. Serious stuff. What do you want for the future for your children? Or one time I was talking about in America, sometimes people have money, they're still not happy. And she goes, no, here, like money is happiness.
Yeah.
And there's so much behind that, right? That threshold of poverty. And
yes,
$100 for them means can they put good food in the bowl for their children this month? For me, it's like, I don't even notice. I don't check my bank account. I don't reconcile my bank account every month. And then joking stuff like, they were big into nicknames, and I shaved my head at one point, and my nickname became Egghead. And for her, like, the rainy season came, all the frogs came out. To make a long story short, she's holding a frog. My nickname for her becomes Frog Mom. So by the end of it, hey, Frog Mom, hey, Egghead, like that joking relationship, and also the serious stuff. With just my 500-word vocabulary, 1,000-word vocabulary, but it was a human connection to this family from complete other side of the world, like crazy opposite life than what I grew up with in Silicon Valley. And I think that was what really anchored for me, this feeling of, hey, international development is real. There's another half of the world that lives very differently. In my life, while I've got some years left on this planet, I want to somehow make that connection to those people and not just kind of ignore them and have them get left behind.
Yeah. And today with PayJoy, you are working on a product that can help people like your host family get a significantly better quality of life. Can you tell us a little bit about the PayJoy story and your flagship product and how you can help families like the one you just described?
Yeah. And if it works for you, I'd go one step back in what inspired PayJoy, where I worked on solar and found with these small scale solar products. I was working with a friend's company, D-Light, that was doing amazing, new solar products, and customers wanted this solar system or this solar lamp, but it was a struggle to pay for the whole thing up front. And so my idea was, could we change how you pay for the product? Could we change the product to fit the customer's financial behavior, let them pay over time? And we found, yes, there was great demand for that. We made it so that, you pay for a week of light, and then if you don't pay, the light turns off. And that fit how people like to pay for things. The other inspiration I'll point to, actually two. The first was mobile minutes. scratch cards. But in Africa in the 2000s, you have a prepaid phone plan. You go buy 100 minutes. There's a code on a scratch card. Like you buy a card, and there's a code that the network operator has printed on there under the foil that you scrape off.
I've used those.
Yeah, and you get 100 minutes, and people totally got, okay, I bought 100 minutes for $10. I use up the minutes. Now I'm at zero. Now I can't make calls. Like that fit people's financial situation. That worked perfectly. The second really cool version of that I saw on my kind of second tour in Africa was for the electric company. They did the same thing where you would, instead of having to go to the electric office and pay a monthly bill, you could buy these prepaid cards and add 10 kilowatt hours to your electric meter. And when it ran down to zero, your electricity shuts off. People got it. So that was my inspiration for these small solar systems, letting people pay in small increments, flexible. When you have money, you can pay, you enjoy, buying something. If you don't have money, it's fine. Like you can deal with it. You find money or you balance your needs. So that was really the inspiration for PayJoy, saying, hey, could we bring this pay-as-you-go concept to all electronic devices for the entire global South where there's not a finance industry built out? And what I mean by finance industry is in basically half the world, even today, the majority of the population doesn't have a credit score, a credit history.
Yeah.
And with zero credit score, no one will give you credit. And without having a credit product to use, you can't build credit. So they're kind of stuck at zero in this chicken and egg problem. Mm-hmm. And so what we said for PayJoy is, can we use the same thing we did with solar and finance the purchase of a device? In this case, we said, let's start with the smartphone as that number one hottest device that 1 billion people around the world are looking. I want to get into the smartphone economy. Like it's the 21st century. You need a smartphone if you want to participate. And basically like a home mortgage, this is really cool. Like, the reason I can get a mortgage at a really low rate is because the bank knows I don't want to get kicked out of my house.
Yes, collateral.
So we did the same thing here. The customer is buying this asset. We started with a smartphone, and if they don't pay on time, the phone locks up and they can't use it. It just says, please pay your bill. But that actually works really well for customers. This is the magic, the nuance in here is like, there's some collateral that improves customer repayment behavior. But if they pay on time, they don't lose access to anything. So it's not like an alternative people would do is they pawn their phone to get money for something else, and they have to physically leave the phone. But we've called it digital collateral. They can just keep the phone actually, and we can get them a loan like a mortgage to buy the phone. And then our product number 2, we can use the phone as collateral to lend them money for anything. So first it was like we buy the phone with a loan secured by the phone, like a home mortgage. And then second, we can lend them money. We can get them a credit card secured by the phone, and they can build their credit and use that credit for anything. So that's kind of the product journey we figured out, from getting them a phone to getting them a loan, building credit for everything. And that's what we're trying to do now, is really bring this next billion. Our motto is finance for the next billion. Bring these next billion customers into the modern financial ecosystem, get them credit, build them credit, get them everything on a path to financial stability and success.
So Doug, what are the conditions that make it possible for digital collateral to work in some markets but not in others?
We haven't found a market where it hasn't worked fundamentally. We're focused on international or emerging markets where the finance system is not built out. I guess the closest would be in the US. We started PayJoy in the US focused on the underbanked Americans, immigrants, kind of the 10 or 20% who are excluded from the financial system today. And it's tough. And, when we partnered with mobile network operators, our investors could get me seated next to the chief marketing officer of Sprint at some, conference. And there'd be enthusiasm. And then, the regional head of sales for Boost Mobile in Los Angeles would be excited for a way to grow customers. But kind of somewhere in the middle, it wasn't a priority for them. Like this customer base was not their priority, the 10 or 20% compared to the 70 or 80%. So during that time, we saw many of our best customers were immigrants from Mexico to the US who were coming for work. And they're here working, they're making money, they're sending money back to their family. They need a smartphone. They use a smartphone. We have these amazing, touching customer stories, people keeping in touch, families keeping in touch, husband and wife, people keeping in touch with their children, doing video chat on a phone and apps. We saw that really strong use case. We followed a bunch of our customers basically back to Mexico checked the product market fit in Mexico, and it was like 80-90% of the population needed what we were doing, offering credit. And so we've been emerging markets focused ever since then. So I think wherever the financial system is not fully built up, there's still an opportunity to grow credit. If you have, in the countries we're in, again, more than 50% of the population doesn't have a built out credit history. And so there's a way for us to jumpstart them into it. But I think wherever that credit system is not built up, digital collateral makes sense. The phone is so powerful. The phone is, the number one device that billions of people are walking around in their pocket every day. So I think it can work wherever the financial system needs that jumpstart to get going.
So these people, and I think Boaz and I are included in that, when you're young, you want to get credit, but in order to get credit, you need a credit score or a credit history. But in order to get a credit history or credit score, you need to have spent on credit and proven that you've paid back. So it's kind of a very difficult cycle to break. Whereas this is something that you don't actually need that credit score or credit history to be able to get access to the credit. Is that correct? So you're facilitating people who normally be underserved or not even included in the system.
Yeah, exactly. And so a typical kind of PayJoy customer experience of the past 9 years that we've been operating would be like rural town or kind of mid-sized town in Mexico. Customer walks into a mobile phone store and says, "Hey, I'm looking for a phone. I have $50 in my pocket. I think that means I'm getting a basic phone." And the clerk at the store will say, "Yes, and you could also get a proper smartphone. Your $50 can become the down payment on a $300 smartphone. You finance the other $250 with PayJoy and pay back over the course of 6 months or a year." The interesting thing is that is very attractive for those customers to get a smartphone instead of a basic phone. That makes sense. The interesting thing to me is it actually works where the cost is affordable to them and most people pay back, and PayJoy can make money and the customer gets their phone. And like we have some awesome research. There's a Berkeley professor who did some research who found even during the repayment period of that phone purchase loan, the customer has like a 6% overall increase in their well-being during that time, if you quantify everything down to income. And so the benefit that they get from the phone is quite significant. They're using it for apps. People are selling things on TikTok and doing video chat with their family and finding customers. A lot of our PayJoy customers are micro entrepreneurs. We did a profile of a woman in Colombia whose family has a sewing business, and they do this online. They connect to people on TikTok or Facebook Marketplace or things and find their customers in the local community. They share videos of it, and that's how they're micro entrepreneurs running this family business, getting ahead step by step. And the really cool thing to me, I couldn't have proven to you that this worked mathematically, but it turns out that it does work in practice in all these countries we've tried: Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, South Africa, Philippines. It's affordable for customers and they can pay back. Yeah.
It's a little bit counterintuitive that from an economist's perspective, they might say, well, a customer who's got a mortgage on a house for $300,000 is more likely to pay back than a customer who's just got a £300 phone. But actually what you overlook is the fact that the phone opens up so many opportunities to start a business, talk to your friends, all the addictive elements of social media, that it's actually a really effective and very cheap way of guaranteeing that customers pay back. Have you found that to be a really effective way of ensuring that people actually pay back?
Yeah. Okay. There are two angles of this I want to hit. One is going back to the financial crisis, and the other is it being okay to default temporarily. So I heard this story from the financial crisis that maybe people got wrong, and they thought, of course, the house is priority number one ahead of like car. But then you saw some reversal of that, when people hit hard times in the great financial crisis a decade and a half ago, where unfortunately it came to this, like people could live in their car, but they couldn't drive their house to work. And so actually the car came out ahead of the house payments. And so I think similarly here, like the phone is so powerful, like you can use a phone for so much today. I mean, just imagine if you tried to go a day with no smartphone. I think for me, I would feel blind or deaf, or like I've lost one of my senses. And we have the problem of addiction, you mentioned at some point, and overuse of, social media for youth. I'm really concerned, my children, I don't want them to, suffer the harmful effects of social media while they're young, and figure out at what age I'll get them a phone. They're 6 and 10 today. They do not have phones. I'd love to advocate for not having phones in schools so kids can focus on their learning. But that's a first world problem, to put it bluntly. And I think, for our customer, it's like, can they afford a phone? Yeah, first, let's get these adults a phone. They can tap all those resources and opportunities. They can really get ahead. The second thing I wanted to hit that you made me think of was it being okay to default. So this is a nuance that we, at PayJoy, we're actually fine with our customers missing payments. And the way we structure it is, it's a bit different than a regular loan with kind of a fixed APR, and interest is accruing and building on the principal, and people can get in a debt trap. So from year of PayJoy, we've really focused on how to make it not a debt trap and how to make it work for the customer. And so the inspiration from those mobile minutes is, if it runs down to zero, it's like we were selling a week of time of the handset itself. If it runs down to zero and you don't have the money today, fine, you don't pay for it, you can't use your phone. It's like those minutes. If your minutes run down to zero, you can't make a call. People totally get that. They understand it, they can manage it. And it gives them the flexibility to occasionally miss payments, be late, and we don't accrue interest over time. So there's not like an APR that's building and you're getting deeper in debt. If you don't have money today, okay, great. Your phone, just says, please pay. Tomorrow you get money, you come back, you can pay it. Or like, your roof is leaking and there's a big storm. Great. Fix your roof first so tonight you can sleep and not have water dripping on you. And you can't make a call tonight? Okay, like our customers can manage their money. They can take care of things. Or, your kid has to go to the hospital. You have to pay, for some medicine. Great. I'd rather have your kid get medicine and not your phone. And that's okay. And we give them that flexibility. So I think that's really interesting, a nuance here that comes from that kind of prepaid mentality.
One of the things that I wanted to ask was, is it just phones that this could work with? Have you had other ideas of things that you could use for collateral? There's so many software, the hardware products which are integrating software, so you could imagine this product working in many other countries with other different types of collateral.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting. Let me kind of walk through some times when I've encountered this in the past. So kind of 3 steps. PayJoy 2015, our idea was, all kinds of electronics. I was saying, hey, we can generalize from solar in Africa to all kinds of electronics for the entire global south, and say, make pay as you go. Pay for a week at a time or a month at a time. If you don't pay, it shuts off. We could do that for a phone, for a laptop, for a TV, for a microwave, dishwasher, washing machine, like all kinds of home appliances and electronics. We can program it or put something on a chip so it shuts off, and it's kind of, virtual coin operated. I remember sketching out how you could use the phone as the internet connection, and it would talk Bluetooth to your fridge or your microwave or something. So that was kind of PayJoy 1.0, and then that was PayJoy 0.1, and then 1.0 was the phone, where we said, okay, what's the number one hottest product? The phone. And I had been at Google and was familiar with Android OS and stuff, so I got it working on Android, where we could secure the Android phone pretty strong, lock it pretty strongly. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to keep 99% of people honest. And so we thought we would do more devices. Then we ended up with the phone. I thought, we could do other things, but we're just on the phone at the start. And then I talked to a member of the Coppel family in Mexico that runs department stores, and they pitched me on this idea. Hey, you could do other things that are not electronic. And I was like, well, hey, we could never do a bed, because a bed, we can't program your bed to eject you from the bed. There's a spring mechanism or something. No, but he was like, yes, I'll tell you how you can finance a bed. Your customers have a phone. We secure the phone as collateral for the bed. And now you can finance things that are not electronic. And actually that was kind of the inspiration. That was kind of what pushed us to the final direction now, which is, we might at some point do, a remote control interrupt on a motorcycle, or Android TV would be Android operating system. Some of our code would carry over. But by default right now, we're just using the phone to jumpstart people into building their credit history. That was our product number 1. And then product number 2 is a general credit line with a credit card they can use for anything. So it's really the same thing that guy gave me that idea, 7 or 8 years ago, was the phone can do everything. So the phone, we get people building their credit history, we get them a credit line. Now they have a $300 credit line secured by a $300 phone. They can buy a bed with that $300 credit card. They can swipe the credit card anywhere. They can buy things online with the credit card. And now it's everything. It doesn't have to be electronic. So that's the default direction we're going right now, which is the phone unlocks credit, and we can use credit for everything. That's not to say we might never, lock a motorcycle or a car or an Android TV. But right now, it's just, at least the most straightforward path seems to be credit for everything, just with the phone.
There are a couple of things which seem ingenious to me. You've got 13 million customers, so this idea is really working well. What do you think it is? Is it the combination of a few ideas, a few technology, like the locking technology, so there is incentive to encourage the right behavior, or is it the insights that you unlocked around the simple paying structure? Like, what is it that you think is really propelling those 13 million customers?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of those started with PayJoy with phone finance, buying a phone. And for a large fraction of them, early on, it was probably about half. It was their first phone. Today, it's still maybe a third of customers. This is their first smartphone ever. It varies, greater number in Africa, where it's lower economic level. So I think we benefited a lot from the global demand for smartphones. So there's this huge wave of people wanting to get their smartphone. And this was kind of, the PayJoy 1.0 vision was, hey, like, can we help the whole world get a smartphone? Because 21st century, you need a smartphone. Like, we can be part of the next billion people getting their smartphone. And so we were able to ride that giant tsunami wave of, every day, thousands and thousands of customers walking into phone stores saying, I would like a phone. And that key, that kind of prototypical customer story I mentioned, customer walks in, has $50, and, they kind of look over at the smartphone side of the store and they're like, oh, I wish I could get a proper, Samsung, Motorola, Xiaomi. Now you can. And the retail clerks want to sell and the customers want to buy. So we were just right there at the right time, kind of matchmaker, putting finance into the mix, making that possible. So we rode that huge wave of demand for smartphones. So that's been a big part of it. And then I think what's allowed us to continue, it's really, what works for the customer is, flexible small payments. That's what they're used to. That's how they manage their money. They have the flexibility to prioritize one thing instead of another. If you actually made them pay, if they were going to pay the $400 up front, like I found, even in, the village in Africa, like I think of that family I lived with, they may have $500, like, hidden in their house somewhere, but it would not be a wise decision for them to spend $300 or $400 of their entire $500 savings on some, technology purchase today. They don't know what might happen. Their phone might break. It might get stolen. Things change. Life is very dramatic and exciting, not always in a good way. And so it really fit for them to be able to manage, small flexible payments and make that happen.
One small anecdote. I have a friend in Colombia, actually, James Downer, who is running a similar initiative, granted a much smaller scale, with e-bikes. There's a lot of delivery drivers who use e-bikes, and he's come up with a similar credit mechanism. Maybe I should put you guys in touch after this call. I want to talk a little bit more about your credit philosophy at PayJoy, because I thought it was super interesting. It was super interesting because you guys seem to have come to many of the same conclusions that I came to after working with similarly the sort of subprime-ish sector. And if I remember correctly, these sort of credit philosophies are the no accruing interest, there's no compounding credit on the actual transactions. There's the philosophy of never pay double, which means that you're never going to be paying over 100% of the purchase value of the phone. And there's a few other ones that come, related to this, such as no late fees, whenever you make a payment, you're current, et cetera, et cetera. Tell me a little bit about the consumer credit angle of these. You've mentioned the psychological aspect of, this is a model that people understand. But from a business perspective, why have you decided on on, for instance, not having any compounding interest on the credit. It's not typical for credit companies to not have interest rates. Why have you decided against it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, again, for us, the inspiration goes back to those prepaid minutes. And if you think about the prepaid minutes, and the reason for that is, I had lived there. I had lived it, initially as a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in Africa and seen that it worked and saw that people could manage it. So I had an example of something that worked. And if you pay your minutes, if you buy your 100 minutes, you use them down to zero. There's not a late fee. There's not a penalty fee. If you don't use your phone for a week, there's not a penalty. Maybe you're sick, so you're just in bed for a week. You don't have to pay. Like that makes sense. That's fair. And so a lot of these things, they fit that way. And then there's the counterexample. So it's interesting. As we're launching our credit card, and we did that first in Mexico a couple of years ago, I thought, of course people would want a credit card. Like you talk about, being young and how do you get into the credit system. I didn't even realize, but Capital One, I think, was doing something innovative in the US when I went to college, and I had no credit history, but they saw I was a college student. They underwrote me based on that. They gave me some small credit line, and I was probably with them for 5 to 10 years. So I think the similar thing here, I thought people want a credit card, of course. But when we went and interviewed customers in Mexico, we found actually they had in our customer segment, they had bad experiences with credit cards. People they knew who had gotten a credit card had gotten in trouble, had gotten in a debt trap, and it had not ended well. They'd probably gone to collections and things were not good. And so there I had a negative example of, people don't know how to use this product. It's like fire. Humanity came to fire and it's really powerful and you can cook your food and have warmth, or you can like burn your hand or burn your house down. So I think credit, similarly, it's a tool. It can be used for good or evil, or it can help you or hurt you. But people had found kind of the traditional model, for whatever reason that we had, from the US, didn't work great for people who were new to credit. And they would, be late and they'd build up fees, they'd build up interest, they'd get deeper in debt, they'd end up in a bad place. And so really our inspiration was from, those prepaid flexible minutes kind of things. And just a word on that, if but feel free to jump in and interrupt me on something else. The way we do the pricing will be like, we call it a multiple. So we could do a 1.5 multiple, means the customer is going to pay 50% extra cost in interest. Depending on the duration, and because it's paid over time, you could equate that to an APR and get some like much higher APR, triple digits or above. But, and I've just really been focusing on this year, our customer in that situation only pays 50% interest because it's never compounding. If they're late, it doesn't increase. So that customer, if they were financing $250 and a 1.5 multiple means they're going to pay back $375, it's only ever $375, even if they're late, even if they miss a payment, no matter what. And so it really gives them that flexibility and protection. Meanwhile, on the PayJoy side, we get to dump 100,000 customers into a bucket, and the bucket as a whole has a good return. Even though individuals can go delinquent, they can go late, and they get that flexibility. So that's the magic there, that it seems to be working for both sides.
I want to lean into that part of the conversation, because this must be something that comes up for you guys a lot, right? So, some person that has perhaps spent their entire life in Silicon Valley looks at your product, does the APR calculation and says, well, you are charging people over 100% APR. My credit card charges me max 30% APR. And most of the time, I don't even pay any credit fees because I just pay it off at the end of the month. What you guys are doing must be terrible, and you're taking advantage of people that don't have any better alternative. That's what someone might say. Whereas someone who has spent time in consumer credit like myself, I look at that and I think, well, actually, so you were saying, okay, like the traditional credit card model doesn't work very well for many of these people. And I would actually argue that actually it works perfectly well for the credit card issuing companies, because, most credit card issuers make, the vast majority, I think 80% of the fees off the small percentage of users who are known as revolvers, who keep paying compounding credit on compounding credit on compounding credit. So I guess the point I'm trying to get at here is, has this been like a difficult conversation to have in Silicon Valley, to try to explain to people that, 40% interest rate on a phone is high, but it's the unit economics that are required, and two, like you can calculate your 100% APR if you want, but it's not quite the same as 100% compounding credit card.
Yeah, people have said that, and they do say it. Every year PayJoy has been in existence, and we go and meet with different people, different potential partners, and they'll have these concerns. We Citibank through Citi Ventures was part of our Series C, and we worked with their reputational risk and fair lending and social impact committees, and actually fleshed this out a bit. My colleague Brad Pennington, who runs our risk and financial product, kind of what is the product, what's the definition of the contract between us and the customer, wrote a few years ago a document we call our pricing manifesto. Manifesto there, intentionally kind of a little exciting, stimulating word, like what do we believe, like what is fair, what is, and it starts from a few pages of kind of dense philosophy of customer benefit and PayJoy benefit. And for me, there's a connection there that we include in our company principles of why are we a for-profit business. And it's interesting, so we reincorporated about a year and a half ago as a public benefit corporation with our official registration in the state of Delaware, and that just elevates our social mission of doing good, bringing people into the financial system, our customers, to the same level as being a profitable business. And our board directors are required to consider those on equal footing. But I think as a business scaling, like because we're a business, we can grow and scale, and to go from 13 million customers now to 50 million. I don't have to go like as a nonprofit, fundraising for grants and convincing people that it's good. And maybe people look at it and say like, oh, I'm not sure it's good. Like our customers say it's good because they like it and they refer their friends. Yeah. And that proves it. But it is a challenge to make that case. As you said, like people look at it and they question it. And so that's why I'm always trying to think of how to position it and make that clear, because like I have confidence. I lived it. Like I lived in that mud hut in Africa, and I know what people helps them get ahead. And so we have our pricing manifesto, and some things fall out of it, like those ones you mentioned. No accruing interest. There's always an escape from the debt trap. People can hand back the phone and walk away debt free. So you never trap. The interest doesn't accrue. Like we've come up with half a dozen of these kind of guardrails. Never pay double. We will not have people pay. We just drew that as a line and said, hey, let's draw a specific numeric concrete line somewhere. And that felt like a good place to draw it. So all those things have fallen out of it as we've grown over time.
I don't envy you. It's a very difficult thing to explain to people that don't quite understand the segment. But I read it and I immediately got it, and I thought, this is genius. You guys really are delivering a product that actually helps people and doesn't put them into a lifetime of debt over an old Xiaomi phone. One other thing that I thought was very exciting from the technology side of things is that unlike most lenders, you have operating system level data on people's phones. Phones, as you mentioned, are now used for everything, for work, for travel. They have sensors like GPS locators, all sorts of things. And that must mean that you can build very, very interesting models around consumer credit. Now, I know you can't really reveal all of your, credit scoring secret algorithms, but is there something exciting about this that you guys have managed to spot? Is that an advantage in your lending?
Yeah, so there are kind of two angles with this, and it's actually what I would call the two technologies at PayJoy. On the tech side, like what gives us differentiation, how we can do this better than the competition. And that's, we used to offer these two technologies to other lenders as a SaaS product. We called them the PayJoy Lock and the PayJoy Score. So on the lock side, it's the integrations with the OEMs. It's not so much that it gives us data, and actually like GPS is pretty sensitive. I think Google Android classifies it as like a highly sensitive permission. And so today we don't track GPS just because it's, a privacy concern. Where we've looked at things like this in the past, if I'm talking more about the scoring side, and my view is if we are transparent with the customer, 100% upfront and clear, and it's consenting adults and they get to make a decision, will I share this data with you? Will I share this, that other data? And they know about it and they consent to it. To me, that's ethical. And, we just want to be sure they'd always have the chance to opt out. But today we don't track GPS data. On the scoring, we use where there is something in the credit bureau. We use that, and it's interesting. I hadn't seen this until we went and did a project with Stanford Business School looking at our data. It's like 1,200 data points that you can get out of the credit score. It's quite a rich chunk of data. And so there's a chunk of our customers, maybe half, who do have something in there. And if not all those 1,200 are there, there's something, income, employment, past payments. And then we will go to non-traditional data sources. There's one called Email Age, for example, that from a customer email can tell us where that email has been used, for how long. It's actually pretty rich. And then the third category is kind of original research. For example, if customers for credit are, for the credit product, they already have an existing phone. If they are willing to share their contacts, we can build a network between people. And I thought this would be best for anti-fraud. You defrauded me, your friend defrauded me, probably the friend of a friend will also defraud me. Surprisingly, we found actually a lot of signal in the positive direction of people who are good payers. So that can go in there. So there's kind of interesting novel research going on in there at all times and on automation. So that's kind of PayJoy's score side. And then on the lock, where we work with the OEMs, like those I mentioned, Samsung, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, Huawei, Motorola, it's actually amazing to me. We went to China in 2018 to partner with OEMs and develop this thing. And I'll tell you, honestly, I didn't think it would work. I'm like, we should go try this because there's a chance it may work, but I would not have given it 50% odds. Our security system at that time was kind of at the app level. And what we did with this security platform we call PayJoy Access, we built it down into the operating system. And actually this year, we're extending it to the chipset. And so it's deeply integrated into phones. And it just gives us stronger security that can't be wiped out. It would be a pretty weak lock if you could just go to the settings in your phone and remove PayJoy app, disable, rewipe the phone. And then it's like, can it survive? You plug it into a tool and reflash the operating system, wipe everything clean. Does the PayJoy app still secure it? So partnering with the OEMs and also with Google, we're closely in touch with to be sure we're in the right place with all the consumer protection policies and security policies. But again, my view is this is consenting adults. If the adult user says, yes, I give you permission to lock my phone if I don't pay you, then we will lock their phone if they don't pay us. And it works. And the whole thing works. And being deeply integrated into the operating system and the hardware even just makes that lock stronger, helps keep honest people honest. We can get better prices for good customers if we can reduce the delinquencies and the fraudsters. So it's all working, for which I am eternally grateful that the pieces seem to be fitting together.
I'm going to ask you a few rapid fire questions given the looming deadline. So you've launched in countries like Peru, like the Philippines, like South Africa, that are not exactly known for being easy to launch in. What lessons have you learned from launching in these developing markets?
Yeah, so today, Mexico is our largest country because we've been doing it there longest. LATAM is our largest region. What I find is when we cross oceans and continents, there is some real adaptation, and we need the right mix of kind of humility and confidence. The confidence to me is, it looks to me like this thing can work globally in emerging markets. I haven't seen something that says it doesn't work. So we should believe it can work, and we should work hard to overcome the obstacles. But there is something different. When we crossed from LATAM to Africa, there are things to adapt to. The average purchase price is different. The nature of fraud and criminal gangs and attacks is different. When we went to Asia, we saw more electronics and chip soldering, and people would open the motherboard of the device and try to desolder the memory chip and stuff. We saw that more in Asia, I think, because of the electronics sector there. So we just have to be humble enough to learn what we don't know and figure out how to adapt to it.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about PayJoy?
I think the one we were talking about 5 minutes ago, again, is the perennial thorn for me, which is anytime we're lending to the poor, people are going to say, hey, are you taking advantage of them? You're a for-profit company. Are you making profit off the back of the poor people? Are you helping them? Or are you greedy, taking advantage of them? And it's a challenge we have to make our best arguments and address. And I'll say look, I lived in a mud hut in Africa. I'm doing this because I care about helping those people get ahead, and just explain methodically and go through it. And we found, for example, like I said, with Citibank, we worked with their different committees and added another couple pages of covenants to be comfortable and sure, and like, yes, this is how you know we're doing right because of this and this and this and that. Customers won't pay extra and all these safeguards.
So from going to 0 to over 10 million customers, what are the main things that stand out that you've learned?
Man, I think each stage has been different. So I remember like 0 to 100, and I remember actually 0 to 12. So 0 to 12, like I remember talking to investors at 0 when I was just getting started, and my brother was helping me write some code, and I thought I needed money. And then I realized from a few people, and one of them kind of almost, had to like grab me and shake me and be like, look, you don't need money. You think you're hearing, no, this can never work. I'm just telling you, no, you don't need money right now. Go and get some customers and come back and show me some customers. And so we went and got 12 customers. We worked with a little Mexican store here in Redwood City, California, in a Mexican neighborhood. And we financed 12 customers' phones. And then our first investor went to that store and talked to the, store owner and saw it was real. And we got that first check. And then it was 0 to 100. How do we actually go and sign up a bunch of stores and make this thing work? And I think each kind of order of magnitude is a step change of new and exciting challenges.
What would you have done differently now that you've got all these years of experience?
We spent maybe 3 or 4 years licensing our 2 technologies to other lenders. And then in 2020, we decided to pivot back to our original business model of PayJoy as the lender. And, we had to go through that path to get where we are. But in hindsight, I think that was, some wasted time, some lost years when we could have done more for our customer if we had conviction on the original business model. So I don't know how we would have learned that without going through it.
Doug, thank you very much for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation. PayJoy has really achieved quite a lot in these years. I think the most exciting thing about this, when I found out about you guys, is that this isn't some academic paper of what could possibly happen. This is something that is already happening right now with over 10 million customers, millions of dollars in origination, and, fast growing company. So thank you very much, Doug, for your time here discussing with us. And it's been fascinating learning about PayJoy.
Thank you so much, Bros and Alex.